Shalom, shalom. First off, I want to start off by giving all the glory, infinite praise, and honor unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Ruach Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone that do rule and teach well. Peace, love, and salutation to the hopeful elect that is out there pushing this truth in all sincerity throughout the four corners of the earth, giving diligence to make your calling of election sure. Shalom. This is your brother Hashah from the Great Millstone Savannah Camp. All right, come back at you with another lesson. Lord willing, I pray and hope that it's edifying, exhorting. All right, and man, it's just allow me to righteously rant for a second. Um, it's just been a day, stressful day. You know, dealing with issues. Dealing with nothing that's uncommon among men, but it's also very vexing. All right, and the scripture that came to mind was this scripture about Lot. How Lot was vexed with the filthy conversations of the wicked, which I'm gonna read, Lord willing, when I stop at this light. Um, but yeah, man, just dealing with the day-to-day life stress of work, you know, um, drama with with the woman. um, it's a lot. It can be a lot. It can weigh heavy on a man's spirit. You know, but this is nothing that no one else is going through. That no one else is not going through. Salaki. All right. Um, Second Peter chapter 2 and verse 4, it says, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell," which this place is hell on earth, man. Just you hear about all the things that are coming. All right, all this technology is AI. They're now destroying books. This thing is happening at a very fast pace. All right, it's happening daily. Okay, in a very short year, in a year, Salakia, which is a very short time, they're able to accomplish a lot. All right, but it says cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness and to be reserved unto judgment. All right, which goes into the book of Jude, where it speaks about how the angels that sin left their estate. All right, which we are those angels. We are those um messengers, because when you go into the word angels, all right, it goes into the word messenger. Okay, so Lord willing, we are part of the elect. All right, we don't make ourselves part of the number, but we are hopeful that we are. We are making our calling and election sure. All right, giving diligence to. All right, but you know, if we are a part of the elect, the Lord has reserved us and put us into chains of darkness unto the day of judgment. All right, when that day comes, all right, we'll be changed. Our vile bodies will be changed. The worries and the stress of the world will be removed. You know, man, I was, just like literally my head is hurting. Just getting off of work, and now I got to go work out and try to take care of myself and eat right. All right, but the stress will make you, sometimes you just want some comfort. You end up eating bad, or doing doing bad habits. okay, because you just want some comfort, but um that's why we stress discipline, we stress doing what is needed, all right, doing what Yahweh Shem Shai requires of us, all right, to make it through this, through this hell that we're in, man. Verse 5, it says, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth, person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing the flood upon the world of the ungodly. All right, and the Lord, is quickly bringing upon the flood. All right, which will be fire this time. Okay, upon this ungodly world, man. Just I was scrolling through my social media, and it's all kind of people on there just spewing ignorance. You know, spewing ignorance, and then sometimes sometimes I let it go, but then sometimes I have time, or sometimes I don't have time, but it'll we're passionate about this truth, all right. So sometimes I be wanting to correct people or defend the gospel, to people who don't even deserve it. Their ass is grass. Their ass is gonna get destroyed, but it's just vexing to see how lies are being just spread and propagated throughout the earth, man. There's this dude on there trying to sound deep, talking about the Egyptian Ankh, and how King James was a homosexual and he was a white man, just and he was into Satan, which is totally false, and then people get on the comment board and just agree with that shit, and excuse my language, but people agree with that, man. They just agree, don't know what the hell they talking about, ain't did no research, not a lick of facts coming out their mouth, just some bull, you know just some bull that they heard on the internet or for somebody else, and it vexes you, it pisses you off, you know and man, ultimately the Lord got to come and destroy this place, man. This place is right for the picking, man. Incredulity and unbelief is at an all-time high. You know, um, it says, a preacher of righteousness bringing the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an example of those that after should live ungodly. All right, and people don't know, they don't consider that they're even living ungodly. You know, that's why the scripture says, hold thy foot when thou comest into the house of the Lord. Okay, and really, the house of the Lord is no longer, um, a physical temple. It's the people. So people don't even consider. That's why the scripture says what? You entertain angels unaware. All right, you entertaining messengers. You're entertaining people that come and are sent directly from the Most High, unaware all the time. All over the internet. You don't know who is who, and you could tell what the scripture. You could tell a tree by its fruit. So people are just spewing all kind of unfruitful beliefs and doctrines all over the internet, and it's you see it, and it's vexing, man. On top of the thing is which the elder been kind of the elder Yashawama even, saying take a break. So that might be something that I need to do, but it's tough. That's kind of where I get most of my news from. Is social media. But I can still get it another way. But it might be time, man. Might be time to deactivate, take a fast, and just get out the way. Verse 7, it says, and delivered just Lot with Salakia, and delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversations of the wicked, man. Yeah, and if you talk to these people in the world, man, their mind is just through, you know, their mind is just, they're totally oblivious to what's going on around them. Salakia. I was, just listening to my supervisor, right? Which he's an Edomite. He thinks he's so smart. But they were talking about AI and how, no, it's, basically downplaying it. So they don't know the seriousness of their situation and how quickly, the world that they know it is passing them away and is going to change, for their detriment. And this is the reason why we have to keep our trust in Yahweh Shem Yahushua, man, and stay rooted and grounded in Him. Because when shit does hit the fan, when these things do come to pass, a lot of these people are gonna bug out. They're not gonna have any, um, they're not gonna know why these things are coming upon them, or what's the scripture says in Isaiah 47, which I'm quoting a lot. It speaks about how they're not gonna know from whence these things came. All right, it's gonna come upon them as a thief, and we're trying to be those prudent men that foresee evil and hide themselves, man, and run to Yahweh Shem Shah, covering our strong tower, in the day that the Lord brings the flood upon this place, man. We're trying to be on that spiritual ark. And hey, you have days where it's tough. You have days where it's vexing, man. But endure all things, man. So I just wanted to do this quick lesson. Lord willing, it was edifying and exhorting in some way. I'm gonna end off by giving all the glory, infinite praise, and honor to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Makakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, a great millstone that do rule and teach well. Peace, love, and salutation to the hopeful elect that is out there pushing His truth in all sincerity throughout the four corners of the earth, giving diligence to make their calling of election sure. Shalom.